Like every entertainment medium, video games are an ever-changing beast. However, games are considerably more fluid and dynamic than, say, movies or TV, due to both their interactive nature and comparative youth as an art form. As a result, the video game industry also moves so damn fast that it's not always easy to keep track of the titles that end up making a major impact, especially as their influence might only be recognizable in retrospect. With that in mind then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that had a bigger impact than you realize. Number 10, Amnesia: The Dark Descent saved survival horror and popularized horror game streaming. The late 2000s were a fairly bleak time for the horror genre. Resident Evil, for instance, had largely shirked its survival horror origins in favor of steroid-laced action, and Silent Hill entered a death spiral upon which it still hasn't recovered. Yet in 2010, an indie horror game was released that not only inspired an entire generation of lower-budget survival horror games, but also contributed hugely to shaping gamer streamer culture as we know it today. That game, of course, was Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which turned the genre upside down by giving the player no direct means to battle its monsters, instead forcing you to run or hide. Amnesia's unexpected commercial success led to a glut of similarly designed first-person indie horror games. But Amnesia's true lasting legacy might be its impact on how players interface with video games generally. See, Amnesia was one of the first horror games to be prominently featured in reaction videos and let's plays on streaming sites, where people tuned in to watch YouTubers scream their lungs out to a scary moment. Most notably, PewDiePie streamed Amnesia early in his career, bringing considerable attention to both himself and the game, and in turn popularizing the now ubiquitous horror game streamers. As beloved as Amnesia remains today then, it's easy to forget how instrumental it was in both rescuing a dying genre and ushering in a new era of games media. Number 9, Gears of War created the blueprint for cover shooters and gritty aesthetics. Gears of War immediately cemented itself as one of Xbox's most impressive IP. A visually stunning sci-fi third-person shooter that won near universal acclaim from critics and kickstarted a franchise that endures to this very day. But Gears' true legacy lies in the gameplay mechanics and distinct aesthetics that it popularized. First and foremost, of course, Gears served as the blueprint for the modern over-the-shoulder cover shooter. Now, it wasn't the first third-person shooter to feature cover-based gameplay, but at the time of its release, it was undeniably the most mechanically robust iteration of this concept. Its movement, traversal, and reload mechanics are still prominently replicated in the genre to this very day, from the likes of Mass Effect to, more recently, Returnal. As one of the first games released using Unreal Engine 3 as well, Gears also had a massive aesthetic influence on the industry for many years. Its grimy, earthy visual style ushered in an era of gritty action games, utterly obsessed with drab or washed-out color palettes, a style that very quickly wore itself thin. Number 8, Braid kickstarted the entire indie game revolution. Jonathan Blow's 2008 puzzle platformer Braid is rightly regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time, but its true legacy lies in the glass ceiling it shattered for indie developers without the backing of a major publisher. Braid was released to the Xbox 360's Xbox Live Arcade marketplace in August 2008 and became an unexpected smash hit, proving to be a landmark title in the indie revolution that followed, paving the way for other acclaimed independent games like Super Meat Boy and Fez to enjoy similar levels of success. Braid proved that the developers no longer needed massive reserves of cash to market and distribute their games. On a platform like XBLA, the cream could rise to the top on merits alone. Braid's success was pivotal then in sparking the indie boom, allowing smaller dev teams to offer up a compelling alternative to the bombast of AAA excess. And almost 15 years on, the industry's output is more diverse than ever before, and it's Braid that led the charge in that regard. Number 7, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt changed open world design forever. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is undeniably one of the most acclaimed and beloved video games of all time, but that doesn't explicitly mean that it's also had a major impact on subsequent games development. And yet, it absolutely has. First and foremost, The Witcher 3 offered up a level of breadth and depth totally uncommon in the open-world RPG. Its side quests in particular were more richly detailed than the main campaigns of many other similar games, in turn raising the bar for what side content should even be in the genre. Compared to almost every open-world game of the time, The Witcher 3 felt so much more alive and vibrant, in turn forcing AAA open-world publishers to seriously up their game. Its more non-linear approach to quest design and emphasis on a persistent living world proved that open-world games didn't need to sacrifice rich storytelling in the process. In turn, The Witcher 3 has influenced the genre ever since, with the biggest open-world games, whether you're Assassin's Creed or Horizon Zero Dawn or even Days Gone, taking major gameplay and narrative cues from it. Number 6, Aiko popularized AI companions and influenced art game aesthetics. Aiko may not be as recognized or revered as Team Aiko's beloved follow-up Shadow of the Colossus, but its status as a cult indie fave belies the tectonic impact that it's had on the industry over the last 20 years or so. Aiko was one of the first major titles to feature a significant AI companion who players needed to tend to throughout the entire game, as became a major fixture of the AAA space in the years that followed. Its minimalist aesthetic was also highly influential for an entire generation of art games which favored atmosphere and precise art direction over action-packed gameplay. The developers of near countless games have cited Aiko as a major inspiration, with a small sample including The Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess, Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater, Uncharted, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, Fez, The Last of Us, Assassin's Creed, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, and even Dark Souls. Aiko's nuanced interactions with an NPC ally and low-key design philosophy made waves throughout the industry, regardless of genre or budget, and its influence still looms large over 2 decades later. Number 5, Wii Sports perfected motion controls and even made gaming mainstream. The fact that motion and gyro controls are still such a popular requested feature in most AAA games is largely thanks to one game above all, and that's 2006's Wii Sports. A pack-in game for the Nintendo Wii, Wii Sports was pivotal in serving as a glorified demo of the Wii's motion control tech, allowing players of all ages to play fun sports minigames without the need to learn off-putting control schemes. The game's accessibility and the fact that it was packaged with the Wii helped make the console a massive success, while inviting non-gamers into the gaming space in a welcoming, low-key way. And so Wii Sports' legacy isn't simply confirming the appeal of motion controls, which do continue to be prominently featured today, but also helping video games themselves transition into the truly mainstream sphere, far beyond their prior stigma as a nerdy pastime. If Wii Sports wasn't such a mechanically perfect example of motion control's potential and didn't strike such a strong chord with people who wouldn't traditionally call themselves gamers, then the industry itself might be looking very different today. Number 4, Race Driver Grid invented the racing rewind. The Forza franchise is largely credited with popularizing the rewind mechanic in racing games. After 2009's Forza Motorsport 3 introduced the ability to redo a tricky section of the track with the mere press of a button. And yet this is doing an absolute thorough disservice to Race Driver Grid, which featured a rewind feature almost 18 months earlier, allowing players to wind their gameplay back by up to 10 seconds. It's a feature that immediately made the game more accessible to casual players like me at the time, who winced at the thought of having to repeat an entire lengthy race just because of one small mistake. And to that end, it was both a solid critical and commercial hit. The rewind certainly isn't an ubiquitous feature in racing games today. I mean, you'll never see it in a die-hard sim like Gran Turismo, that's for sure. It has since appeared in a number of popular genre entries, including Colin McRae Dirt 2, and most popularly, every Forza game from Forza Motorsport 3 onwards. And yet, Grid gets very little credit for concocting and implementing such an ingenious feature, with Forza's dominance in the racing space instead earning it more of the plaudits than it really deserves, brilliant though the franchise as a whole is. Number 3, The Legend of Zelda introduced console game saves. Now, it's no secret that 1986's original The Legend of Zelda has had a major impact on the RPG genre over the last 35 plus years, setting the template for the prototypical action RPG, which has of course been majorly iterated upon since. While the game is wildly heralded for influencing open world game design now, its true lasting legacy might actually lie in how it impacted general game design on home consoles. See, The Legend of Zelda was the first console game to include an internal battery that allowed players to save their progress, rather than having to either start the game again from scratch or awkwardly input passwords to resume their game state. The ease which players could immediately resume their exact progress then influenced Zelda's own design, with players encouraged to explore every last nook and cranny because there wasn't any time-related urgency anymore to plow through to the end. Saving became an ever-present feature in console games in the years that followed, of course, in turn allowing developers to shift away from simplistic single-session game design in favor of more refined, expansive experiences intended to last dozens or even hundreds of hours. Number 2, Far Cry 3 bolstered Ubisoft's open-world formula. Far Cry 3 is remembered as the game that helped elevate the series to true AAA blockbuster status, but it also had a wider impact on not only the franchise, but also Ubisoft's gameplay template as a whole. See, the success of focusing the game's marketing around its unforgettable villain Vaz led Ubisoft to use a similar approach for every subsequent mainline Far Cry game, playing up the colourful personalities of their antagonists. But Far Cry 3's commercial success also served as the blueprint for Ubisoft's many open-world games to come. The map absolutely littered with things to do, the presence of radio towers, outposts that need to be liberated, resource gathering, RPG mechanics, and so on, all became a cornerstone of Ubisoft's AAA open-world business model in the years that followed. Other developers have, of course, also adopted aspects of Ubisoft's open-world design, enough that the collectathon formula does feel rather tired today. Yet Far Cry 3 nevertheless cemented a gameplay loop that kept players hooked into the game world for a massive amount of time. Number 1, Team Fortress 2 opened up Pandora's loot box. Valve's legendary multiplayer FPS Team Fortress 2 was released in 2007 to major acclaim, but it made its true mark on the gaming industry when it went free-to-play in 2010. At this point, the game became supported by microtransactions, with players able to shell out real-world cash to unlock supply crates. That is to say, Team Fortress 2 popularized the modern loot box system as we know it. Though it wasn't the first game to include a randomized monetization mechanics, Team Fortress 2 is the one that popularized it on a mammoth scale by proving its huge commercial viability. The game's revenues grew 12-fold after it went free to play, and at the time there was little pushback against the presence of loot boxes in the title. I mean, after all, the items were cosmetic, they didn't affect gameplay, and could be grinded out in-game. But Team Fortress 2 did nevertheless open Pandora's box, with loot boxes becoming increasingly ubiquitous in games of all genres in the years that followed. In many cases, deployed in nefarious ways intended to exploit players' compulsions in order to part them with their hard-earned money. Most infamously, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was ripped to shreds upon release for EA's planned predatory loot box mechanics, enough so that numerous governments around the world even began investigating the legality of such practices. Despite this, loot boxes and similar monetization systems remain massively profitable for publishers, and so it's highly unlikely that they'll ever fully go away. But it is amusing to look back and think that, in terms of at least Western mainstream gaming, all of this began with Team Fortress 2. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Did you know that these video games had this much of an impact on the industry at large? And are there any influential titles I missed off here? PsyOps, I know that should definitely be on here, but we didn't have time for 11. Either way, while you're down there, could you please also give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.